Hello world of YouTube, and welcome to my Death Grips Discography review. This is being made in celebration of the anniversary of the release of their first major project, full-length project, their mixtape Ex-Military. It's when I got into the group, and at least from my perspective, Death Grips to me were easily one of the most attention-capturing and prolific bands of the 2010s. They're a noise rap, punk, cyberpunk influenced at points, just abrasive band whose sound was really just fueling pockets of the internet throughout the 2010s. You know, anytime they would drop a release, it captured the zeitgeist's attention immediately. And it's partially because they continued to push their own envelope with each subsequent release and explore different facets of their sound, whether it was reinterpreting an old sound, adorning a different production style, really doubling down on either samples or punk-leaning aesthetics. You know, the band themselves had a really interesting, trajectory as a group. You know, they had this early burgeoning that then became just this enigmatic force that would just drop stuff out of the woodwork, with surprise, and just really, again, capture the internet's intrigue. And they also did a lot of work throughout the internet early on with like ARGs and stuff like that. They knew the internet, and they knew how to work within the confines of it so very well. The band themselves, sonically, they had Flatlander's all-encompassing synth work paired with Zach Hill's frenzied yet controlled drum style, with MC Ride on the top of it all, just getting real dark and sinister and angry for the most part throughout a majority of their career. And today I'm going to be breaking down all 9 of their major releases, rank them, give you guys a roadmap. If you're new to Death Grips and you're just wanting to see somebody talk about the band's discography, I'll give you guys some jumping on points if you're a newbie to the group. And just generally talk about what I like and dislike about this band's catalog. But before I get into that, they have a couple of EPs that I feel like are pertinent to talk about when talking about Death Grips, so I'm going to do that first, in order from oldest to most recent. The self-titled EP that dropped in 2010 feels the most sort of like a warm-up to something else. It unlike sort of subtly or in some way sort of shifting their sound in a different direction, minimally, or in some cases kind of extremely, this feels the most like them sort of getting their footing. And a couple of tracks from here ended up on Ex-Military, Tachyon and Where It's At, which is renamed on Ex-Military, but the tracks that are here are good, and they kind of show the proof of concept of Death Grips as a band. Outside of those groups, Full Moon gets abrasive as hell, and I love it for that. And I like a lot of the sort of, I don't want to say bare bones, but less cacophonous approach seen on the tracks known for it. And the Death Grips song itself sort of feels like, again, sort of a warm-up to the concepts of Ex-Military. It's an interesting point of interest.
Especially if you really like the sounds in Ex-Military and you want to see it in much more of a raw Genesis.
Post Jenny Death, they dropped an EP called Interview, 2016, that had a companion video of the band being interviewed with the music from this EP playing over it. And this EP sees them sort of shifting gears into what would be Bottomless Pit, but with much more of a focus on the synthetic touch that coated that record. I mean, tracks like Interview C and B sound like sort of flips on some drum and bass style, almost some breakcore-ish shit. I could see that factor playing into like Wipeout style game, like full stop. While tracks like Interview A and D see them sort of injecting their own sort of abrasiveness or sonic palette into that style. Some of the synthetic tones and drum production fits more in line with some of the stuff that they dropped in the past. Some of it sounds like some stuff from On the Moon, the A-side to The Powers That Be. While Interview E has this completely different tone altogether, I also dig it. I dig a lot of the vibes on this EP. I think that it's really interesting, and I think that it's got some, again, a good kind of bridge between the sounds. I feel like if you like Bottomless Pit and you've never listened to this EP, I feel like it's really worth your time. There's some cool stuff in here, and I feel like it sort of sets them up for that project pretty well. Interview 2016 would be my favorite EP of theirs if Steroids, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Gabber Megamix didn't exist, because holy shit, this EP goes hard. It's sort of one big suite of 8 different sections, and they all just go hard on them. The production on here is insane. It doesn't sound like a bridge from, like, Bottomless Pit into Year of the Snitch, like what the Interview EP did. It feels like its own pocket of insanity, and I love it so very much. Like, the only real breaks from the breakbeat electronic stuff outside of the intro, My Whole Life, which just has this sort of cyclical approach that you could see from, like, a No Love Deep Web era. Come and Go kind of has a Jenny Death style to it. It feels more like a rock-leaning cut than anything else. And Black Body has this sort of calm, serene, synthetic approach that still has some jitteriness to it, but it's not as insane as, like, the lo-fi insanity on High or Bald Head Girl. Fucking Intangible goes hard. I love this EP so fucking much, and it shows Death Grips, even late on in their prolific era, still has a lot of gas left in the tank. It's definitely a nice gem within their catalog that I know a lot of people already know about, because again, Death Grips fans, if you like it and you've already gotten into it, this is like just a nice nugget of excellence. But I definitely think that if you like a lot of the intensity on records like Bottomless Pit or some of the intense moments on Government Plates, you'll like the intensity on here. It goes really heavy at points in a way that I think is cool. It almost feels like an expansion on the 2016 EP the more that I think about it, because it does have some of that jittery sort of breakcore style, but in a much more like Death Grips fashion that I think works. You know, for all that I'll say about Bottomless Pit, I feel like this sort of refined that sound a little more into something even more digestible as someone who likes that stuff and likes what they do. This is definitely up there for, like, top of their catalog for sure. The last thing they've released thus far in their career, and I'll get to sort of their career and in the future at the end of the review, but Gmail and Restraining Orders feels like sort of dropping something to tie up loose ends. You know, from what I understand, this was like a sound collage that they would, like, play live sometimes, or at least that's what research I had done into this project had told me. It's got some, like, ambient vocal stuff. It's got some frenzied Bottomless Pit era abrasiveness. You know, it's got some break beats with some heavy abrasive sounds. It's all right. It's my least favorite release of theirs, hands down. It's not bad. It just feels like sort of, again, just a product to have out there to sort of please the fans who have been listening to the bootleg of this for ages. I hadn't done that, and listening to it now, it doesn't do anything for me that the rest of their catalog didn't already fulfill. You know, it's a point of curiosity, I guess, if you're just wanting that much more Death Grips. But they've got 9 records worth of material and more EPs that are far better than this to listen to. It is what it is. You know, it's not like awful music. It's just low tier Death Grips in presentation and just general release. It just felt like it was sort of shat into the world, which also kind of lends to the sort of tying up loose ends thing that I was talking about before. It is what it is. But let's go ahead and start ranking the records proper, because we got a lot to talk about. And this might be the obvious pick to put on the bottom of the list when looking at Death Grips' discography. I have some friends that will be upset that this is on the bottom because they are advocates for this project. And that's not to say that this project is bad by any stretch of the imagination. I do still really like Fashion Week. I just feel like when comparing it to the rest of the Death Grips discography, it sits on the bottom for a handful of reasons. One, it feels the most scattershot. While I like a lot of the Sonic ideas on here, and I feel like by and large, they do some Sonic stuff that they've never really done since as a collective unit, it feels all the more directionless because of it. This record feels like just something out in the ether, and it almost feels, I mean, the record itself kind of feels like a joke with its release because it was put out between both halves of the Powers That Be, and the last letter of every title in the track listing spells Jenny Death When, because Jenny Death, the second half of the Powers That Be, which was highly anticipated, kept getting pushed back. But that's not to say that the tracks here feel like filler, because they don't. A lot of the Sonic components here are honestly really interesting and feel like stuff that they've never really done since, and create this vibe all its own. You know, the guitars on H2 feel super normal for them. W sees them crafting like almost a traditional horror piece. D sounds like a smooth electronic cut a la like Selected Ambient Works. And even like the loop on N1, a track that I really, really enjoy the lo-fi nature of, doesn't sound like them by and large. It feels like this project feels like the band sort of putting out all of the Sonic experiments that didn't quite make any of their projects out into one sort of compendium release. And it kind of has that sort of scattershot compilation feel. It's just a lot of instrumental cuts. And that's not a bad thing at all, because I enjoy what this project has going forth on it. I mean, even the tracks that sound like Death Grips more, like J and E1 and N3, all still have this sort of different touch to them that makes it feel tied to this project. And it's not the lack of MC Ride specifically that does that. The whole production style of this project, when it feels cohesive, feels like it's separate from everything else they've done. You know, H1 sounds like it could fit on like government plates, but it has this production style all its own that I really think is interesting. You know, this is definitely a point of interest if you like Death Grips and you want to hear more of just their instrumental side of their sound, more fully, you know, explored into different avenues. This is not a bad place to go. You know, I just don't think it's their strongest effort, their tightest effort, or their most cohesive effort by and large. It's still not bad, it's just not the best. I originally had this higher because, especially when it came out, I was really geeked on side A of The Powers That Be on the Moon. I liked the concept of taking Bjork's voice, a voice that is so very unique, and using it as a sort of sonic component to your overall instrumental backdrop. And I feel like the points where it works, it's great. I love Up My Sleeves and Black Quarterback. For as memey as Have a Sad Come Baby is, the use of Bjork's vocals on that track are great. But I feel like this project is, for as short as it is, not as packed tight with consistency as time has gone on to me. You know, like I said, those tracks are really good. I love the drum work on Voila. And I think Fuck Me Out following Have a Sad Come Baby is just poetic excellence. But as a whole, I feel like this track listing isn't as great as I used to think it was. You know, and I even was originally, before, when I was prepping to do this review, was going to say that this project is very front-loaded. But I love Big Dipper. I think the beat on that track knocks. And again, Voila is a good sort of tight, drum-filled track as well. It's just a very inconsistent project. And again, I feel like the whole concept of Bjork as an instrument in your instrumental backdrop isn't as fully realized as it may have seemed on paper. But it's still a cool project, and I feel like if you enjoy some of the sonic components on No Love Deep Web, you'll definitely get enjoyment out of pockets of this project.
I also feel like if you enjoy the concept of using vocal samples into your backdrop, like on Government Plates, and you want another place to go after that, listen to this record, because it's got Bjork doing the same thing.
Because it definitely has a similar vibe going on in points. It's just not quite as a holistic experience as I initially may have told myself it was. You know, this may be weird to say because it's low in my ranking as it is, but if Death Grips were to have an underrated record, it would be Government Plates. I feel like because I was even one of the people that once it dropped, I liked it, not as much as the subsequent releases, or as previous releases, and post this record's release, they also had Jenny Death hype building. So once that happened and the initial meddling scores were there, this record just sort of left people's minds, probably, to me, I think, anyway. It's not up there in the conversation with, like, their other records as quality stuff. But I feel like revisiting this record, especially for this review, gave me a new appreciation for it that I'm happy to have. Because I always liked slices of this project. I loved the super aggressive intro to this project, Bob Dylan song title reference. That was easily their most intense song to date. I love that, and I feel like it starts the record off on a incredible foot. But I like that they show how dynamic this record is by immediately following that up with Anybody, a really good lower key track that has a great synth line and showcases one of the other sonic components that this record is going to have in spades, and that's sampling and working MC Ride's vocals into its own instrument in the backbeat of the band. You know, similarly to what they would do with Bjork's voice on the record I just finished talking about. And I feel like the utilization of that is actually really compelling. You know, whether using it to spin into the backdrop of Two Heavens, or to be more of the forefront in the hook of This Is Violence Now, or
I'm Overflow. And I was going to mention Big House right after this, but for a completely different reason. But I do really love Big House. I love the intense synth beginning that has like almost this falcon call in it that immediately cuts to this lower key feel before the intensity picks back up. It's an incredible cut in the back half of this record that is so slept on. IMO.
I like the sort of warbly trippiness within Birds. It's a track that I didn't really like when it came out, but revisiting it, I don't know if it's just nostalgia for this time in Death Grips' career or what, but I love Birds now, and I really like how it bleeds well and it feels like a wheel. I feel like what I said was wrong or off about side A, Powers That Be. I feel like this is a full project. This is a full-fledged experience, because even throughout the record, even by the tail end of it, with the title track, which has a great synth tone, and some of those sharp lyrics that I tend to come to Death Grips for at times, into another sample-based cut of Bootleg that has such a lo-fi touch to it that I think is incredible, and again, showcases that dynamics so incredibly well. It's a great sort of send-off to this project. You know, I like this record a lot more than I used to, and I feel like if you haven't spun Government Plates in a while, you should definitely do so. It's not a gateway record, but it's a good place to end up eventually. It's a good stepping stone in their catalog that shows that they could really still push their own sonic palette this far, or at this point in their career, after they had already had the initial hype surface up with their first couple of releases. It's definitely, again, it's underrated, if I were to say. I had a really tough time picking which record was going to go next in the ranking, because both of these projects I enjoy a lot for different reasons, and I feel like if I'm being honest with myself, their most recent record, You're the Snitch, is going here in the rankings. I like this record a lot. I thought that its production was really, really weird and didn't completely fit the sound of the band, but they made it work so well. You know, a lot of the sonic palette of this project feels more like the nightmare fuel of a mid-90s video game console. You know, ha 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 sounds like you're entering the depths of hell in a haunted Super Nintendo cartridge. Dilemma has this sort of super eerie swamp carnival feel. Black Paint sounds like this lurching, swampy, almost stoner sludge track from like 92 in the best way possible.
And they still have ways to introduce their own palette that they've been working with throughout their whole career thus far into the fray as well, with tracks like Fly, Streaky, and Shit Show.
You know, the drums on the horn section feel ripped out of like the Bottomless Pit, Jenny Death era. And the Fear, for all of its foreboding drones, feels like the sort of monolithic send-off that they try to build to at parts of their releases. And that's ultimately what I think is interesting about this release. For how different and boldly shifted the production sounds, the band harnesses that incredibly well to create a release that sounds just like another top-notch Death Grips project. I feel like this is not a good starting point, but similarly to Government Plates, I feel like it's equally a point of curiosity, a point to get to eventually if you enjoy some of the weirdness and darkness seen on records like Government Plates or Bottomless Pit. You know, I feel like it's definitely a point to get to eventually, especially if you like weirder production styles, or if you've gotten used to the production styles while listening to the records and you want to hear something way out there at points. I would listen to You're the Snitch. It's definitely has its merit. It's worth it to me. But ultimately, I put it below the next record I'm going to talk about because the next record is just, it's really fucking good, man. And ultimately, Bottomless Pit won out this fight because I love how it takes the synthetic abrasiveness and sort of upfront nature of a lot of the sheen the synthetics have from like the Money Store and funnel it in through the punk and super aggressive styles that they continue to expand upon from that era in through Jenny Death. I mean, the 1-2 punch of giving good people bad ideas, constant blast beats, into Hothead's just scattershot, sporadic approach to song composition is insane. But the aggressive synthetics don't let up through a majority of the project. I mean, spikes, warpings, insanely harsh intro into its soft synthetics, bubbles buried in the jungle, fucking 3 bedrooms in a good neighborhood are all just incredibly dense and aggressive and abrasive cuts that go toe-to-toe with some of their most intense in their catalog thus far. I love the rumbling low end on 80808. I think Trash's droning sound is also really nice. I like the lower key synthetics on It feels like sort of a soft expansion on some of the sounds seen on No Love Deep Web, sort of a companion piece to the Money Store itself. This just feels like them reflecting and expanding in a way that they hadn't really done thus far in their career, in a way that I feel like is super gratifying. You know, for all of the sort of readaptation that goes on in this project, it still has a lot of fresh ideas. They never really did blast beats like this before, man, and it sounds awesome. I feel like if you like the Money Store and you want something heavier, this is an immediate next listen. You know, it's more so than You're the Snitch and Government Plates, an immediate next step to get to, but I feel like this is an easy record for people who are getting into Death Grips to follow up listening to with their releases. It's a great project that, again, sees them sort of channeling some catchier or more hook-driven moments. You know, some of the tracks like Trash and and Giving Good People Bad Ideas have this sort of refrain style written into it, more so than the sort of cyclical nature seen on the Moon and Government Plates, in a way that, again, feels like sort of calling back to the Money Store. It's like, it's not their catchiest release, obviously, but it's definitely a companion to their catchiest release in the best way possible.
I feel my core, hear my chamber revolve in your brain like the whole.
I could see somebody putting No Love Deep Web below Bottomless Pit in their rankings, and I could understand why. To me, I like that it has this sort of expansion on their sound and provides a good contrast at points to a lot of the sonic abrasiveness seen on the Money Store, but it doesn't lose that catchiness at points, and I feel like ultimately showcases the band's talents in a different way that I really enjoy. Story of this record as well, I think, is really interesting and funny. You know, this is supposed to come out the same year as the Money Store. The band were saying that the whole time. They were hyping up the Money Store. They were like, we also have this other record coming out. They were signed to a label with Epic, who told them not to. They said, fuck you to the label, dropped the record anyway, with a dick as the album cover. It's also the only Death Grips record I've given a solo review for. Like, I've talked about You're the Snitch on the listening log and all this sort of stuff. I did a blog post years ago about the Money Store, but this was the only video solo review I gave to one of the records. And what a weird record to pick, I guess. But I like that in tandem with having some of the abrasiveness you would expect with tracks like World of Dogs and Lock Your Doors, and some of the sample work on Whammy feels like ex-military-ish. Come Up and Get Me has this same sort of rugged approach to it that I could see being tangential to like ex-military.
In fact, I would even argue MC Ride's delivery on Come Up and Get Me and Lil Boy and No Love rival ex-military in intensity and are more intense than any of his vocal performances, and sort of how just raw the lyrics feel than on anything in the Money Store.
They also have some different sounds that see them in a more minimal or a really catchy synthetic atmosphere with that minimalism, like on Lil Boy or on Black Dice. The lo-fi edge on Black Dice, I feel like, shaped a lot of the back half of their career by and large, along with pop sort of twinkling synth sounds in there. And Artificial Death in the West is easily still one of their most low-key, synthetic-driven cuts that they've ever made. You know, that whole track as a whole just feels like this completely different tune altogether. And that's ultimately a lot of the components that I love that set this above Bottomless Pit. It's a much more dynamic release in a full-fledged sort of way. You know, for all the praise I gave to Government Plates for doing something similar, this did it first. And while it's not doubling down on a sonic concept of like using MC Ride's voice as an instrument, I almost like this more for just being a little more straight-laced in presentation. You know, it's got a lot of that same aggressiveness that I loved from the first couple of releases, but it still had some surprises in the cut that kept me invested and keep me coming back still to this day. I still love revisiting this project, man. I like a lot of what it has going on. It still has, again, some of that hook-driven style that coded their first couple of releases, but in a much different style. You know, I dig this project a lot, and I feel like it, in tandem with the Money Store, aren't a bad jumping on point, to be honest. You know, if you like the Money Store's abrasiveness, or if you've heard that the Money Store can be a little abrasive at times, and you want something a little less so, listen to No Love Deep Web. I think it's a really good starting point in the band's catalog, IMO. But again, I feel like if you're going to listen to two records on their catalog, it would be this and the Money Store together, because they work really well together, and providing this sort of context of where the band was at the time and how dynamic their sounds were and their overall sonic palette was at the time. It's a great record to me. You know, I had a hard time picking what was going to be in the number 3 and the number 2 slot on this ranking, and partially because these three records, like a lot of the Death Grips fandom, mean a lot to me. I like all three of these releases for their similar but different reasons, and what I like about Jenny Death, which is easily one of their most anticipated, was easily one of the most anticipated records in their catalog thus far, if not in tandem with the Money Store as their most anticipated release, but this sees them sort of taking that punk sampling style and that punk edge that was on ex-military and translate it into their own sound without losing that punk edge. You know, a lot of the guitar production on here feels very punk-esque. Hell, tracks like I Break Mirrors with My Face in the United States and Turned Off and On GP at points feel like traditional punk jams done by Death Grips. And you know, tracks like Centuries of Doom and Beyond Alive and Why a Bitch Gotta Lie all have that same punk guitar production, but they find ways to warp it or make it fit into their glitchy industrial hip-hop sound across these longer, more dense songs. And I feel like it works incredibly well to their credit. You know, or they even find ways to expand them on, or, you know, doubled down on some of that electronic love that they would continue to show love for on Bottomless Pit, with tracks like Inanimate Sensation or On GP at points, or Death Grips 2.0 as well, that I think is incredibly well executed. I feel like this record was definitely worth the hype to me. Absolutely. I think the reason why it sits below the 2 that it sits is because when I revisit the 1 and 2 spots, they still fill me with the same chaotic energy that they did upon first listen. You know, when I listen to Jenny Death, it feels more like I get hyped and I get into it, but it's definitely more of an appreciation for the song craftsmanship here. I like that they're pushing their own boundaries still on this project, and I appreciate that at this point in their career, they're still wanting to either expand upon styles that they sort of toyed with in their early years, or find ways to experiment with their own boundaries. And I feel like it is successful at doing that. I think a lot of the reason why people also love this record is because it does live up to the hype. You know, while a lot of the songs are lengthier and they got a lot more going on, it's rewarding to listen to this project. And I feel like that's ultimately also why it sits high on the ranking for me.
I also think that unlike Disc 1, or Side A, or whatever you want to say about it, Jenny Death succeeds across the board at accomplishing its sonic concept, or what it's trying to accomplish, you know, as a whole project, more so, incredibly, than Side A. It feels like a much more complete package than Side A did, and honestly makes Side A look a little lesser by comparison.
You know, for all of its punk edge, it's still got a lot of cool stuff going on in it, man. And I feel like, while I don't love every song here, I think Piss Piss is kind of a filler track. If there ever were to be one filler track on this project, it would be that. But a lot of this record, it's banger after banger after banger. And I feel like if you enjoy punk music, if you haven't necessarily listened to the more noisier industrial or hip-hop leaning tracks that the band is known for, I would listen to this and then like dip into like Ex-Military and go from there. Or if you like this, go to like Bottomless Pit and surf around their discography through there. It's not necessarily a good starting point for like outsiders to aggressive music, but I feel like if you like aggressive music and you've never listened to Death Grips, listen to Jenny Death and then kind of go around their discography at your leisure. Because I feel like this isn't a bad starting point into the band's catalog. I feel like it was a reward for fans, but it also gave a good gateway for outsiders to get into if they like a certain style. For sure.
Into the flame, into the fire with no regard for it.
Ex-Military was something special. I still, like I said when I was talking about Jenny Death, whenever I throw on Ex-Military, it still fills me with that same raw just feeling that it gave me 10 years ago. It's still just this super aggressively charged project that gets me hyped every time. You know, and I talked about it not too long ago when talking about Beware on my samples that I love in hip-hop video, but I also enjoy a lot of the other samples on here. I love the samples on Lord of the Game, that guitar sample on I Want It, I Need It, and on Spread Eagle Cross the Block lend to that sort of aggressively charged, hype-inducing feeling that this record gives me, along with that low-end rumble and punchy percussion on tracks like Guillotine and Tachyon. That meltdown and Guillotine gets me fucking hyped. That chopped up high end that's so shrill, I love that part in that track. It's one of my favorite parts in a Death Grips song because it's such a stark contrast from the rest of the track itself. I also like the points where they don't get, like, MC Ride's not right up in your face like on Culture Shock. I love the ambience on 5D. It shows that they do have these dynamic sonic concepts they want to explore, but I feel like them keeping it mostly aggressive on this release was to the group's credit, because that is ultimately what drew a lot of people to them, and is one of the components that I still really love in this band's output. This is easily the most raw, the most ferocious, the most sinister the band sounds from a sonic perspective. And a lot of the lyrics on here, like on Spread Eagle Across the Block and Lord of the Game, are just gritty and harsh in the best way possible. You know, I I love a lot of what this band had going on this project. You know, I love that even on tracks like Blood Creepin', they synthetically sort of tease how they would expand upon that in the next couple of releases. It's a great foundation for this group, and I feel like if you're not getting into the band through the next record I'm going to talk about, or Jenny Death, Ex-Military isn't a bad starting point. I understand that to some people, MC Ride is sort of a barrier of entry. It's something I talked about in a podcast not too long ago where I sort of compared Death Grips to Clipping, but I feel like past that barrier of entry, this is easily one of their tightest, most digestible projects that they've ever released. And to its credit, it still holds up 10 years later.
Now, if only I could get it released on, like, streaming or, like, in a vinyl release now that it's at its 10-year anniversary. That would be the shit, right?
It's such a long way. Yeah.
While easily the most obvious pick to put at the number one slot because it is the record that a lot of people hold to a high regard, almost 10 years later, this record still holds up to a large degree. You know, it's easily the band at their most accessible without compromising a lot of the aggression and harshness that Ex-Military set them up to have. You know, MC Ride's delivery is more subdued on more parts of this record than it was on Ex-Military, like on Get Got and on Double Helix. But even on the tracks where he gets super aggressive, or the production is more aggressive, he's not at the same 10 that he was on pockets of Ex-Military. Sure, he's still screaming and he's still getting really aggressive, like on The Fever, or on Hacker, or on System Blower, or Hustle Bones. You know, 90% of this record, MC Ride is still on 10. He's still screaming. He's still got a lot of shit he's got to say. But because the production around him feels much more harnessed, the chaos that's here feels so much more controlled, it makes him even more palatable to the listener. You know, there's still a lot of denseness in the production here, like on Hacker, or on Hustle Bones especially. The Fever has a lot of production stuff going on. Even if you're looking at sort of the sonic components, it's dense, but in a way that feels palatable. And that's ultimately why I feel like it is the best gateway into their catalog. You know, for all of the aggressiveness or the punk leaning edge that the last two records that I talked about had, this presents a lot of the noise and glitchiness that the band has, by and large, on a lot of their catalog in the most presentable fashion. You know, I feel like MC Ride's delivery works so well with what's here. And it also helps that this record has hooks for days, whether it's the continued resurfacing sample on Blackjack, the cyclical loop sample on Lost Boys, again, the hooks on Hustle Bones and Hacker, both sonically and vocally. The Fever's hook of I got the fever, the got on Get Got, the Hustle Bones coming out my mouth, I've seen footage, I stay noited, I've seen footage, I stay noited, the bitch please, you must be smoking rocks. There's hooks on this thing for days, and for an aggressive hip-hop glitch industrial group to pull together something this catchy feels impossible. But they did it, and it's incredible. And I feel like it's sort of set a precedent in the scene that it's possible. And I love that. And I love this record. I love this band. I've had a lot of fun talking about them today with you guys. And I hope that that's showcased. Because I think Death Grips are easily still one of the most interesting bands of the 2010s. And I feel like for as prolific as they were, they had a lot of dynamic shit that dropped. But Money Store is still easily at the top of that list. And that's going to be my Death Grips discography review.
I said this at the beginning that I was going to bring this up and I forgot to film it, but I feel like Death Grips are done. I feel like they just kind of faded away into the background, never to be seen again. And I could be wrong. They could drop something next week and I would be none the wiser. But I feel like if they're not done, they're at least on a very extensive break. And how could you blame them? You know, they were so prolific over the last decade that I'm sure they just burnt through all of the ideas that they could conceivably concoct together, which is, I mean, not hard to see given where they started and where they ended up sonically. If you look at Ex-Military and You're the Snitch, while the soul of the band and the foundation is still there, there's such an evolution that went down from A to Z, you know, and that's so interesting to look at. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to sit down and talk about this band today, because I really genuinely love a lot of their music, and I love their arc as a band sonically. They got a lot of cool stuff that they dipped into, and I hope that you enjoyed exploring that with me.
What did you think about it? Did you like what I had to say about their records? Do you like the ranking that I made? Let me know your thoughts on this review in the comments down below. If you did like this review, be sure to give it a like. If you want to see more of my music, gaming, and general nerdery content, be sure to subscribe. Special thanks to my patrons if you want to join their ranks to get early access to content, exclusive content, or to help drive the community through polls. It's linked in the description. I'm going to get out of here. Thank you again so very much for watching. I have been Val Rack. You guys have good days, lives, and situations. And I'll see you another day.